It's always incredibly rare if a show remains unchanged throughout its development. From the time the initial idea is conceived to the airing of its pilot, a show can undergo a plethora of changes, sometimes even turning it into a completely unrecognizable final product. Whether or not these changes are always for the best is hard to say, so we'll leave it up to you guys, as we go over 9 Nickelodeon shows that changed during development. CatDog. Before pitching the series to Nickelodeon, show creator Peter Hannon had intended the project to be a children's book titled The Amazing CatDog Man. Instead of featuring the actual CatDog, the book would have focused on a superhero with 2 heads, one of a cat and one of a dog. It's unclear if this would have worked similar to how it did in the final product, with each head being their own individual. Presumably, the CatDog Man would have had a muscular human body with 2 heads popping out of the neck. Who knows? Eventually, Hannon decided to retool the project into what we know now as CatDog and pitch it to Nickelodeon. It was initially picked up as a series of 2-minute shorts that likely would have aired during commercial breaks. However, once the theme song was recorded, the higher-ups liked it so much that they had decided to turn it into a full series, thus giving us the CatDog we all know and love.
The Loud House. Early in development, Lincoln and his family would have been rabbits, and he would have had 25 sisters in total. This is playing off the joke/scientific fact that rabbits reproduce a lot. We might have ended up with this version of the show had Jenna Boyd, a Nickelodeon executive, not intervened and suggested the show creator, Chris Savino, go with a human cast instead. He made the change and stated that it would be the best advice he had ever received in his entire career. Perhaps having 25 sisters would have made developing them all much more difficult, and rabbits just weren't as relatable. A remnant of those old designs can be seen with Lincoln's plush doll, Bun Bun, who shares his original design. With humans being the new dominant species in the series, it came time to design all the characters. However, like most shows, the characters we ended up with went through a variety of changes. Among all the small changes, the second oldest sister, Lenny, went through the most. Initially, she was supposed to be 8 years old, making her one of Lincoln's younger sisters by 3 years. She was also intended to have super strength and be obese, mirroring the character she was named after, Lenny from Of Mice and Men. It's unclear why these changes were made, but perhaps it was done to make her appear similar to the rest of her siblings. Lastly, according to an episode of the Nick Animation podcast, before the decision to make Lincoln the middle child, ideas were tossed around with him being amongst the older and younger siblings. Ultimately, the decision was made to have him be smack dab in the middle, as it just made sense thematically.
Hey Arnold. Throughout its run, we learn a lot about the people living in the Sunset Arms boarding house in Hey Arnold. But longtime fans of the series may remember another person who disappears from the show almost as suddenly as she showed up. Appearing occasionally throughout the first season, a woman named Lana Vail seemed to have lived in the boarding house. It's said that she was a single lawyer originating from southeastern Europe, based on her accent. She only had one speaking role during the episode Heat, where she asks Arnold if a little cold air is so much to ask. Other than that, she makes numerous background appearances throughout the first season, until it's indicated that she moved out sometime during the second season. Despite that, she still appears from time to time in background shots in the rest of the series. So what is the deal with this woman? Why are we even talking about her? Well, her initial role in the series might be what ended up causing her to get the boot. A fan going by the username Criminy, who knew the series creator Craig Bartlett personally, asked him about the character in a now deleted video. Bartlett states that the initial plan for the character was for her to have a crush on Arnold, and ask him to do favors that would make him feel uncomfortable. His exact words on the character are no longer available, so it's unknown if Lana was a predator or just being friendly without any social cues. Nevertheless, it's easy to see why such a concept for a character would be shot down for a kids show. With this idea gone, the writers couldn't find a new role for her that they liked, and eventually decided to cut her from the show entirely.
The Fairly OddParents. I'm sure many of you have heard the story about how Timmy Turner was initially going to have a blue hat, but it became pink when series creator Butch Hartman ran out of blue ink and only had pink lying around. Aside from his original blue hat, Timmy was going to have red hair and be named Mikey Turner. His hair was changed to brown to avoid appearing too similar to Vicky's, however. The name, Mikey, was inspired by Butch's brother, Mikey Hartman. However, the two got into a fight, and the character's name was then changed to Timmy, after his other brother, Timothy Hartman. Butch was eventually able to name a character after Mikey in 2017, on the show Bunsen is a Beast. In the initial Oh Yeah cartoon shorts, Timmy was voiced by the late Mary Kay Bergman, but after committing suicide, the shorts were redubbed with Tara Strong, the current voice actress. Moving away from Timmy, in the original shorts, it was shown that Cosmo was the smart one and Wanda was the dumb one, and also implied to be the original fairy godparents to Cinderella. Going even further back, before their designs were finalized, Cosmo was going to be a fat bald guy, and Wanda would have been tall and thin. Cosmo's initial design was reused for the male Wanda in the episode The Boy Who Would Be Queen. Additionally, Wanda was originally going to be named Venus in order to match Cosmo's space-themed name, but the team couldn't pass up the opportunity to make the obvious Wand pun. The name Venus was kept as Wanda's middle name though. A few other small fun facts are that Dinkleberg was originally only going to be in one episode, but he kept returning due to popularity, and that an animated theatrical film was planned around 2005-2006, but was ultimately cancelled.
Invader Zim. Invader Zim is a messed up, albeit hilarious show. Everybody knows that. But how messed up could it have been before? The final product we got still turned some heads, so let's take a look at what was going on beforehand. Before the concept of Invader Zim was even floating around, series creator Jonan Vasquez and Nickelodeon toyed with the idea of pitching Vasquez's comic, Squee, but the studio turned it down due to the incredibly dark nature of the comic. Once Zim was pitched, it initially had a 50s B-movie aesthetic, with a comedy style similar to Animaniacs, Ren and Stimpy, and Rocky and Bullwinkle. However, this direction barely made any progress before Vasquez realized he hated working on something so predictable. In the final show, Zim is voiced by Richard Horvitz, but was almost voiced by Mark Hamill or Billy West. Nickelodeon turned down Hamill, as he made the character sound too old. And West was turned down by Vasquez, as he was worried that his voice would be too recognizable thanks to his involvement in another sci-fi show airing at the time, Futurama. Throughout the series, there would be a lot of cut gags that relied on characters dying on screen and jabs at some of Nickelodeon's other series like Rugrats, but of course the network stepped in to put a stop to all that. Invader Zim was ultimately cancelled in 2006, despite having 13 unfinished episodes remaining. Adult Swim was interested in continuing the series, and even bidded to purchase it from Nickelodeon, but the studio refused to sell the rights, angering fans and creators alike. In 2010, Nicktoons Network aired many reruns of Invader Zim, even having a 24-hour marathon at one point, in order to test the waters for a potential revival. While ratings were good, the studio deemed it too expensive to revive the show given how it previously struggled to maintain its $500,000 budget per episode, the standard in Nickelodeon. Ultimately, it was decided that the series would continue in the form of a single film, titled Invader Zim Enter the Florpus, which is finally releasing in late 2018.
Rugrats. Rugrats was among the first of Nickelodeon's flagship animated series, so it makes sense that a lot of time and care went into developing the series. This, of course, includes many changes, and many potential spin-offs. The initial title for the show, One Something, was sold on a simple log line with barely any development behind it. The initial pilot episode that was never released to the public was titled Tommy Pickles and the Great White Thing. It was animated in the same style as the original intro seen before every episode in the full series. What's interesting about this pilot episode was that it was intended to be a normal episode in the full series at one point, but unknown circumstances halted its production. A TV guide in August 1991 falsely advertised the episode, leading it to become a rather infamous lost episode. The full original pilot was released on the 2001 10th anniversary DVD. Speaking of lost episodes, a total of 15 known episodes were in development at one point but were ultimately cancelled, some due to unnecessary fantasy sequences that series creators simply disapproved of, rejected by Nickelodeon due to costs, or posed the threat of children imitating something dangerous, such as an episode where Chucky gets his head stuck between banisters. One of the major plot points for Chucky is him dealing with his deceased mother and being raised by a single father. Originally, though, his mother was going to be alive and was divorced from his father instead. This is backed up by a prototype of his mother appearing in the background of the episode BBQ Story, and Stu saying that Chucky's mother would pick him up in the morning in the episode Real or Robots. Nickelodeon thought that divorce and death were too heavy for the show's audience, but ultimately settled on her being dead as a plot point later on, even being the focus of the second film, Rugrats in Paris. Speaking of Chucky, he was originally intended to be the bully character before Angelica made it in the show. Instead, he did a complete 180 and became the heart of the show. Early on, Angelica would almost never be punished, in order to teach kids the lesson that life isn't fair. The crew working on the show quickly began to hate Angelica and how nasty she was, and turned this around quickly. It was far more satisfying seeing her get in trouble for all the terrible things she did.
Danny Phantom. Jackie Phantom just doesn't roll off the tongue like Danny Phantom, does it? Well, we could have had that at one point, as Butch Hartman initially wanted to name Danny after Jackie Chan. This was way back in 2001, just as series creator Butch Hartman learned that Nickelodeon was looking for a boys animated action show. After dropping the name Jackie, as well as other options like Billy, Kenny, and Davy, the pitch for Danny Phantom and the Spectre Detectors was created, which was the original title for the show. Many large aspects of this version of the show were completely different, with the biggest being Danny's lack of powers. That's right, Danny would have been fully human. He and his friends would have used different gadgets to fight off Ghost, as well as him riding a motorcycle in reference to Marvel's Ghost Rider. Hartman eventually realized that it would be much cooler for the main character to have superpowers instead, and changed the series into what we know today. Danny did eventually ride a motorcycle in the episode Livin' Large, as a possible reference to this original idea. Danny also originally had a pet owl named Spooky, but this was removed due to the first film in the Harry Potter series being released around the same time as production began, which featured Harry's pet owl, Hedwig. Hartman feared that it would be seen as too similar, and removed the owl from the show. Danny and Sam were also going to share a psychic connection, showcasing how close they are and hinting at their romantic interest in each other. This was cut very close to the initial premiere for a variety of reasons. For starters, Danny already had his ghost powers, and Sam had other defining attributes. This psychic connection would be too much for viewers to juggle alongside everything else being introduced at once. Hartman also didn't want the relationship between the two to be too developed at the start, as he wanted them to grow throughout the series with the whole will they won't they dynamic.
SpongeBob SquarePants. While Rugrats was certainly the biggest Nicktoon for a time, it was no match for the juggernaut that is SpongeBob SquarePants. The character has ascended to the same level of recognizability as Mickey Mouse and Mario, but we almost got an entirely different version of the character. Multiple different versions, actually. For starters, SpongeBob almost never happened in the first place. The spot in the Nicktoons lineup that eventually went to SpongeBob was originally intended for another show, a full series version of Sniz and Fondue from Kablam. After the series creator left Nickelodeon over office policies, the spot was given to SpongeBob and production began. The original name for the character was Sponge Boy instead of SpongeBob, a name that was later ditched after series creator Steven Hillenburg found out was already trademarked. Additionally, SpongeBob was meant to look like an actual sea sponge at first, instead of the square kitchen sponge that we have today. The idea was dropped after Hillenburg found that designing a realistic sponge character was too difficult and looked unappealing. The kitchen sponge design was chosen to give him a squeaky clean nerd look, as if he's a square peg trying to fit into a round hole. The voice actor for Plankton, credited as Mr. Lawrence initially, auditioned for the role of SpongeBob using the exact same voice he uses for Plankton. This take on the character was likely turned down due to sounding too old and menacing.
Shut your mouth, you mediocre clarinet player.
Mediocre?
The role of Plankton was also almost given to another character, Bubble Bass. In the original version, Bubble Bass would have been a kid who went around criticizing the Krusty Krab and overall causing trouble for Mr. Krabs, before the decision was made to give that role to Plankton. A few other small changes were the Krabby Patty being called the Barnacle Burger, Barnacle Boy being a salty old sailor named Barnacle Bill, and Sandy being in the nude in her tree dome instead of her usual bikini. After the success of the show, Spike TV approached Hillenburg and pitched an idea for an adult cartoon version of SpongeBob, similar to the critically panned Ren and Stimpy adult party cartoon. This version of the show would have featured SpongeBob and Patrick as a gay couple, and most likely be full of tasteless and offensive jokes. Luckily, Hillenburg declined, and SpongeBob went on to become a worldwide phenomenon.
Avatar: The Last Airbender. Out of all the shows on our list, none have gone through the sheer amount of changes, at least that we know of, as Avatar: The Last Airbender. The landmark fantasy series was initially conceived with a sci-fi setting. This version of the series would have featured Aang as a boy from a 1,000-year-old lost civilization instead of the 100-year-old air nomads. He had two sidekicks that followed him, a robot named Momo 3 and a polar bear dog that seemed to fill the Chewbacca role. The robot would eventually become Aang's pet lemur Momo in the final series, who was also at one point intended to be the reincarnation of Aang's good friend Monk Gyatso. The polar bear dog ended up being unused in the original series, but was later retooled as Naga, Korra's pet from the sequel series The Legend of Korra. As the show moved past its sci-fi setting and gained the fantasy setting we all know and love, the series began to come into focus. Katara, originally named Kaya or Kia, was always intended to be the heart of the group, but Sokka wasn't always going to be so lively and comedic. It was only after hearing actor Jack Desana audition for the character did the creators decide to make Sokka a more comedic relief character. Towards the beginning of development, Fire Lord Ozai was intended to be the only villain. A member of the crew, Eric Coleman, suggested that they add a secondary villain, the banished Prince Zuko. Zuko quickly became an integral part of the series, being a foil to Aang. At one point in development, Zuko was intended to have a pet hawk, as a sort of mirror to Aang and Momo. The hawk was eventually scrapped, but its design was reused in the episode The Runaway as Sokka's pet hawk, Hawky. It disappeared after one episode, never to be seen again, but its fight with Momo was a reference to their rivalry in the original version. Lastly, a large point of contention amongst the fanbase was whether Aang and Katara as a couple was the best choice, or if it should have been Zuko and Katara. Well, according to an event titled Avatar Extras, where the original episodes were aired featuring fun facts about the series, Zuko was the original love interest for Katara. Now, the creators have a long history of messing with fans about this pairing, so it's unknown if they were just making fun of the fans here. Either way, it's worth mentioning because, it is entirely possible.